Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. The old wooden door creaked open, its hinges protesting as if the house itself was reluctant to let anyone in. The smell of dust and something more, something heavier, like secrets long buried, greeted her as she stepped inside. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her fingers clutching the edges of her worn-out suitcase. She wasn't sure if it was the unfamiliarity of the place, or the unsettling words her mother-in-law had spoken just hours before. Only those of noble lineage can stay here. The words lingered in her mind, repeating like an ominous mantra. What did that even mean? And why had her mother-in-law chosen this moment to say it? She wasn't from a noble family, at least not in the traditional sense. Her parents were ordinary people, hard-working, kind, but nothing about them suggested any sort of royalty or grandeur. Sarah didn't have time to dwell on the strange warning. She was here now. There was no turning back. The house, imposing and silent, loomed ahead of her, its ancient walls lined with shadow. It was the kind of place that seemed too large, too grand, for anyone to live in comfortably. The wallpaper, faded and peeling, whispered stories of a time long gone, and the air was thick with the weight of memories that didn't belong to her. Her husband, Tom, had left to take care of some last-minute errands. He'd promised to be back by evening. But until then, she was alone in the strange house. She hadn't been given much of a choice. It was either stay in the house or risk upsetting her mother-in-law, who had made it very clear that this was her home and her rules. Sarah shook off the uncomfortable feeling in her chest and walked deeper into the hallway. The house was vast, stretching out with high ceilings and narrow, winding corridors. It almost felt like it was designed to make you feel small, insignificant, like a visitor in someone else's world. As she made her way toward the living room, something caught her eye. A portrait hung crookedly on the wall, an old painting of a woman whose face was partially obscured by a dark, heavy frame. The woman's eyes seemed to follow her as she passed, and Sarah had to force herself to look away. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint rustle of the curtains swaying in the breeze. But something about it, something in the air, felt off. It wasn't just the size of the house or the eerie stillness. It was something more subtle. A sense of being watched. Sarah paused, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting to find someone standing there. But there was nothing. She swallowed hard and forced herself to keep moving. She needed to unpack. She needed to settle in. The living room was grand, with dark, polished wood furniture and thick velvet curtains that were drawn shut, blocking out the light from outside. The fireplace, though cold, still held the remnants of a long-dead fire. It was the kind of place that demanded respect, but Sarah felt no comfort here. The room felt like a museum, full of things that had no place in her life. Her mother-in-law had barely said a word when they arrived, only directing Sarah to the guest room and muttering something about the house's ancient rules. She had been polite, but distant. It was clear that she didn't think Sarah belonged here, not truly. But Sarah had to wonder, why? What was so different about this house? She tried to shake the thought from her head, but it clung to her like a shadow. Suddenly, there was a noise from upstairs. A creak of floorboards, followed by a soft thud. Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. It sounded like footsteps. But who else could be here? Tom had left for errands, and her mother-in-law had disappeared to her own quarters. She looked toward the staircase, the dark wooden steps stretching upward into the shadows. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling more than she'd intended. No answer. Sarah took a cautious step forward, her feet barely making a sound on the old floor. She could feel the house settling, the walls groaning as though it were waking from a deep slumber. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. With a deep breath, she started toward the stairs, each step making the wood creak underfoot. The air seemed colder as she ascended, the shadows deeper. When she reached the top, she paused. The hallway stretched in front of her, lined with closed doors, their dark outlines almost blending into the walls. Another creak echoed through the hall, coming from the farthest room on the right. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she took another step forward. It was probably nothing, a rodent, maybe, or just the house shifting. But the more she thought about it, the more uneasy she became. She reached the door at the end of the hall. It was slightly ajar, just enough for her to see the faint outline of the room beyond. She pushed it open with a trembling hand. Inside, the room was dim, with only a sliver of light creeping through the crack in the curtains. The furniture was draped in dust covers, and the air smelled stale, like it hadn't been used in years. Sarah stepped inside, her feet barely making a sound on the carpeted floor. The room was cold. Colder than the rest of the house, as though it were frozen in time. A large wooden chest sat in the corner, its surface worn and chipped, but still sturdy. Sarah couldn't help but feel drawn to it. She slowly walked over and reached for the lid, her fingers brushing against the cool wood. The air in the room seemed to hold its breath as she opened it. Inside were old books, faded and brittle, some stacked neatly, others scattered haphazardly. Among the books, something shiny caught her eye. A small, ornate key lay at the bottom of the chest, its surface tarnished but still beautifully crafted. Sarah picked it up, holding it in her palm. It felt oddly heavy, like it belonged to something important. She couldn't explain why, but she knew that key was connected to something. Something that had to do with this house, and with her mother-in-law's warning. But what? Before she could contemplate further, the sound of footsteps echoed behind her. Quick, hurried steps that grew louder and closer. Her breath caught in her throat. She spun around, but there was no one there. The door to the room had closed on its own. Suddenly, the house felt suffocating. The walls seemed to press in on her, the air thick with something she couldn't name. Sarah's pulse raced as she stumbled back toward the door. She had to leave. She had to get out. But when she reached for the handle, the door wouldn't open. She yanked harder, her heart hammering in her chest. It wouldn't budge. She was trapped. Behind her, she could hear something moving, soft, deliberate. The key in her hand felt heavier than ever, as if it were pulling her towards something she wasn't ready to discover. And yet, she knew, deep down, that the mystery of this house was only beginning to unfold. Sarah sat in the dark room, her hands trembling as she stared at the ornate key clutched tightly in her palm. The sound of her own breath was too loud in the silence of the room, her heart racing as if it could never slow down. The door had finally opened on its own, but the strange feeling that had settled over her hadn't disappeared. It was as if the house had its own pulse, its own life. And she was part of it now, whether she liked it or not. The key felt heavy, like it had been waiting for her to find it. There was a purpose behind it, a reason for its existence. But what was that reason? And why had it been hidden in the chest, buried beneath all those old books? Sarah stood up slowly, the dust-covered floor creaking beneath her feet as she walked to the window. The house seemed to stretch endlessly before her, its dark corners filled with shadows that seemed to grow deeper as the day faded into night. It was a house that didn't belong in this world. It felt like a relic from another time, a time when things were kept secret, locked away, never to be seen again. She felt a shiver run down her spine. A loud thud sounded from downstairs, breaking the eerie stillness. It was followed by another sound, this one softer, almost like a whisper. Sarah froze. Was someone in the house? Her mind raced, but she couldn't figure out who. Tom had left hours ago. Her mother-in-law was still nowhere to be found. And yet, the house seemed to be alive with movement. Her first instinct was to run downstairs and search for the source of the noise, but something held her back. The house was too big, too strange. Every step she took seemed to echo louder than the last, and she wasn't sure she wanted to uncover any more secrets tonight. But there was the key again, heavy in her hand, as if urging her forward. She turned and left the room, the cool air from the hallway brushing against her skin. Her footsteps were muffled against the thick carpet as she made her way back toward the stairs. As she descended, the dim light from the chandelier cast long shadows across the walls. The grand staircase creaked under her weight, the sound almost ominous in the silence of the house. Sarah tried to steady her breath, but the knot in her stomach was impossible to ignore. Every instinct told her to leave, to get out of the house before whatever was hidden here consumed her. But that damn key, it called to her. She reached the bottom of the stairs and stood in the hallway. The house stretched out before her, its high ceilings and darkened doorways making it feel like she was standing in the heart of a labyrinth. Every hallway seemed to lead to another door, another room filled with memories that didn't belong to her. But there was one door she had not yet explored. A large, old wooden door at the end of the hall. It was different from the others. Not because it was any larger, but because it was the only one that seemed to be calling to her. It wasn't a sound. It was more of a pull, a feeling that seemed to come from deep within the walls. Sarah took a deep breath and moved toward the door. Her hand reached for the handle, but before she could turn it, the door creaked open on its own. The air behind it was cold, and she stepped inside. The room was vast, even more so than the others, and it smelled of aged wood and something else, something faintly metallic. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light, and she could make out shelves filled with old books and a desk that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But it was the far wall that drew her attention. There, in the center of the room, stood a large, ornate mirror. The frame was covered in intricate carvings, the wood darkened with age. The mirror itself was dusty, and Sarah hesitated before stepping closer. Something felt off about it. The way it stood there, in the middle of the room, almost as if it were waiting for her. But she couldn't resist. She had to see. Sarah wiped away the dust on the mirror's surface, and as she did, a chill swept through the room. She froze. For a split second, she saw it, a flicker of movement behind her reflection. It was gone in an instant, but her heart skipped a beat. Was someone behind her? She turned around quickly, but the room was empty. There was no one there. But the mirror, its reflection wasn't right. It showed Sarah standing in front of it, just as she was. But the background was different. The room appeared brighter, the furniture newer. In fact, the entire room looked entirely different, as if the present had been swapped for something from the past. Sarah blinked, rubbing her eyes. She took a step back. The reflection seemed to shift, like it was a living thing, adapting to her every movement. It wasn't possible. There was no way that mirror could be showing something that wasn't there. But what if it wasn't a reflection at all? What if it was a window? A glimpse into something that had happened long ago, something that had been hidden, buried by time? Her breath came in shallow gasps as she stared at the mirror, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The image flickered again, this time holding steady long enough for her to catch a glimpse of a figure in the background. A person. It was hard to make out at first, but then, her heart pounded in her chest. It was a woman, her face hidden in shadow. But there was no mistaking the long, flowing dress she wore, the lace that seemed to shimmer in the light. Sarah's eyes widened as the figure in the mirror turned slowly, revealing a face that was both familiar and foreign. It was her mother-in-law, but there was something wrong. Her mother-in-law looked younger, but not just younger, happier. Her face was serene, almost glowing with an unearthly calm. The reflection smiled at Sarah, the edges of the smile stretching in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the figure disappeared, leaving only the dim reflection of Sarah staring back at herself. She took a step back, her mind racing. What had she just seen? Was it a trick of the light? Or was it something far more sinister? Suddenly, she felt the weight of the key in her pocket again, heavy against her side, as if reminding her that she was meant to unlock something hidden, something long buried. But where? What was she supposed to do with it? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps again, this time louder, closer. Sarah spun around, her pulse spiking. But when she looked, no one was there. Yet, she felt the presence of someone, something. She wasn't alone. The house had secrets. And Sarah was beginning to realize that it wasn't just the house itself that was strange, it was her family's history, their bloodline, and whatever had been hidden away for generations. And as the house whispered around her, Sarah knew one thing for certain: she had to uncover the truth. She had to find out what was hidden before it found her first. The room was heavy with silence as Sarah stood there, staring at the mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. She still couldn't shake the image of her mother-in-law's face, so serene, so unnatural. Was it a trick of her mind? A hallucination? No, it couldn't have been. The reflection had been too vivid, too clear. She glanced around the room, as if expecting something to leap out of the shadows. But everything remained still. Too still. The heavy curtains hung motionless by the windows, the dust on the floor undisturbed, the old furniture forgotten by time. Yet, the air felt thick, charged with an energy that Sarah couldn't explain. The house wasn't just a home, it was a place where the past clung to every corner, to every inch of wood, like a stain that could never be washed away. Taking a deep breath, Sarah moved away from the mirror. She couldn't stay in this room any longer. Every step felt like a weight on her chest, a pressure that threatened to suffocate her. She needed answers. She needed to understand what was happening. With the key still heavy in her pocket, Sarah made her way down the hallway toward the library. Her steps were deliberate, but the house seemed to stretch endlessly before her, each door a barrier to something she couldn't yet grasp. Her mother-in-law's cryptic warning echoed in her mind: only those of noble lineage can stay here. What did that even mean? What was it about her family's bloodline that had triggered such a strange and ominous warning? She paused at the library door, the heavy wood creaking slightly as she pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and leather, and the shelves were packed with books of every size and shape. The room was dim, lit only by a few scattered candles. The walls were lined with thick, ancient books, their spines cracked with age, and Sarah couldn't help but wonder how many of them contained secrets, secrets that no one was meant to know. Sarah walked toward the nearest shelf, her fingers grazing the spines of the books. There were no titles to speak of, no labels, nothing to indicate what they held. She reached for one and pulled it off the shelf, the dust flying up into the air as it hit the floor. The leather-bound cover was worn, its edges frayed from years of neglect. She opened the book slowly, the pages creaking as they parted. The writing inside was archaic, the words difficult to make out. But one thing was clear: this wasn't a book she had ever seen before. Sarah flipped through the pages, each one more cryptic than the last. As her eyes scanned the words, she began to feel something strange, a sense of familiarity, as if the words were speaking directly to her, whispering a story she had always known but had long forgotten. But what was it? What was the connection? Her fingers turned another page, and then she saw it, a picture. It was a sketch, drawn with remarkable detail. The face of a woman, wearing a long, flowing dress, just like the figure in the mirror. But this woman, her face was unmistakable. It was her mother-in-law. Young, radiant, but still unmistakably her. Sarah gasped and stepped back, her pulse quickening. What was this? How could her mother-in-law be in this book, in this ancient, forgotten tome? The more Sarah looked at the picture, the more she saw the resemblance. It wasn't just a casual likeness, it was her. Down to the smallest detail. The same sharp eyes, the same high cheekbones, the same long dark hair. But how could this be possible? The woman in the picture looked to be from another era, from a time long before her mother-in-law had even been born. Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. She looked back down at the page, her fingers trembling as she turned the next. And then, there it was again, another name, another image. This one was different though. This time, the image wasn't a picture, it was a family tree. She stared at it for a long moment, trying to understand what she was seeing. There, in the center of the diagram, was her mother-in-law's name, Eleanor Blackwood. But as Sarah's eyes moved along the branches of the tree, something caught her attention. The names of other people, strangers to her, people she had never heard of, spread out like an intricate web. And at the farthest branch, there was a name that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Theodore Blackwood. The name of a man she had never heard mentioned before. But as her eyes scanned the tree again, she realized something else. The Blackwood family didn't just have a history, they had a legacy. An ancient one. The bloodline ran deep, stretching back hundreds of years, filled with names that sounded like something out of a legend. Sarah's eyes drifted back to the page with the family tree. Beneath the names, written in bold, dark letters, were two words, blood ritual. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What was that supposed to mean? What was this, blood ritual? Was this what her mother-in-law had been warning her about? Was this the reason she had said only those of noble blood could stay in this house? Before Sarah could process any more of it, she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around, startled. There, standing in the doorway, was her mother-in-law. Eleanor Blackwood. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, until Eleanor finally broke it, her voice cold, almost emotionless. "You found it, haven't you?" she asked, her gaze piercing. "The truth. The truth about this house and the family you married into." Sarah couldn't find her voice. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Eleanor stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the shelves, lingering on the book Sarah had been reading. "You weren't supposed to find that," she said softly. "You weren't supposed to know." "Why?" Sarah managed to ask, her voice shaking. "Why is this so important? What's going on here?" Eleanor's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion passed over her face. "It's all about the bloodline," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "This house was built by our ancestors for a reason. And only those of pure blood, those who are truly Blackwood, can survive here." Sarah took a step back, the weight of her mother-in-law's words sinking in. "Pure blood? What are you talking about?" Eleanor sighed, her expression softening. "I've spent years keeping you safe, Sarah. But now, you've uncovered the truth. You're not just anyone. You're a part of it. You always have been." Sarah's mind raced, but she couldn't make sense of it. What was Eleanor talking about? How could she possibly be a part of it? "Theodore Blackwood," Eleanor continued, her voice low, "was my great-grandfather. And he was the one who started it all, the ritual, the sacrifices. The Blackwood family is tied to something much darker than you can imagine. And now, you're connected to it too." Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "No, that can't be true." Eleanor's gaze softened as she stepped closer. "I wish I could protect you from this, Sarah. But the house has chosen you. The bloodline is calling you. It's time to face the truth." Sarah backed away, the weight of her mother-in-law's words pressing down on her chest. The secrets of the Blackwood family, her family, were darker than she had ever imagined. The house wasn't just a house. It was a prison. And she had been brought here, not by chance, but by design. It was clear now that Sarah's journey had only just begun. And she had no idea where it would lead, or what it would cost her. The weight of Eleanor's words hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. Sarah stood frozen, her back pressed against the wall, unable to comprehend what she had just heard. She had suspected that there was something wrong with this house, with her family, but this was far beyond anything she had imagined. The bloodline. The ritual. Her connection to it all. Her mother-in-law stood before her, her eyes soft but filled with something Sarah couldn't place. Was it regret? Guilt? Or was it just the cold, calm acceptance of a truth that had been too long hidden? You don't understand, do you? Eleanor said softly, her voice almost sorrowful. The Blackwood family has always been bound to something ancient. It's more than just blood. It's power. And it's ours to wield. But it comes with a cost. Sarah's mind raced. What kind of power? What cost? Eleanor's gaze hardened, her hands shaking slightly as she folded them together. The kind of power that keeps us alive. The kind of power that allows us to transcend time. But it requires sacrifices. Her voice faltered for a moment. And you're the next sacrifice, Sarah. The word sacrifice hit Sarah like a physical blow. She took a step back, her knees buckling as a cold wave of fear washed over her. She couldn't breathe. Next sacrifice? But she was still trying to process everything Eleanor had said. The bloodline, the ritual, the house that wasn't just a house. Her heart hammered in her chest, threatening to break free. She had married into this family without ever suspecting that there was something so dark lurking beneath the surface. But now, it was all becoming clear. Her husband, Tom, had never told her the truth, and neither had Eleanor, until now. You said. I'm a part of it, Sarah stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. What does that mean? What does it mean? Eleanor's eyes softened for a moment, and she took a tentative step toward Sarah. It means that you are the final piece, Sarah. The last member of the bloodline to be initiated into the ritual. Initiated? Sarah's voice shook with disbelief. You're telling me that I'm supposed to sacrifice myself? To what? This house? This legacy? Eleanor's lips tightened, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of something like fear in her eyes. It's not just a sacrifice, Sarah. It's a choice. You have to choose whether you want to live, or become one with the house, with the bloodline. It will give you power, but it will also take everything from you. I don't want power, Sarah cried out, her voice cracking. I just want to leave. I want to go back to my life. I didn't ask for any of this. Eleanor's face twisted into something unreadable, and for a brief moment, Sarah thought she saw something in her mother-in-law's eyes, something like pity, or perhaps regret. You can't leave. None of us can. The house won't let you. Sarah felt the walls of the room close in around her. The house. She had suspected something was wrong, but now, it was becoming impossible to ignore. It was the house. The house itself, the way it seemed to breathe, to watch her. She could feel it in every room, in every step she took. It was alive, and it had been waiting for her. Eleanor stepped back, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression distant. The house is the center of everything, Sarah. It holds the key to the power. The power we need to survive, to continue the bloodline. Every generation of Blackwoods has given a piece of themselves to the house, in exchange for what it provides. Sarah's mind spun, trying to process the enormity of what her mother-in-law was saying. She was no longer just married into this family, she was part of something much bigger, something far darker. The bloodline. The ritual. And the house. I don't understand, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. What is this power? Why does the house need it? And what happens if I don't comply? Eleanor's eyes flicked to the door, and Sarah followed her gaze. The silence was deafening, but for some reason, she felt like there was something more. Something watching. Listening. It's not about what happens if you refuse, Eleanor said slowly. It's about what happens when you accept. The ritual will bind you to the house, to the bloodline. But it won't just make you a part of it. It will consume you. Change you. Sarah took a step forward, a surge of panic rising in her chest. Change me? How? Eleanor's voice dropped to a low whisper. You'll live forever. As long as you continue the ritual. You'll never age. But you'll never truly be alive, either. You'll be trapped here, in the house, part of the legacy, forever. Sarah recoiled, her stomach churning. This was too much. She had married into a family that had lived for centuries, hidden in the shadows, feeding off some ancient power tied to the house itself. And now, she was supposed to join them? No. No, I can't, Sarah whispered, her hands shaking as she stumbled backward. This isn't what I want. This isn't what I asked for. Eleanor's eyes hardened again, and she stepped closer to Sarah, her tone sharp. You don't have a choice. None of us did. This is your destiny, just as it was mine. Just as it was Tom's. And now, it's your turn. Sarah shook her head, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The house, the ritual, the power, it was all too much. She needed to escape. She needed to get out of this nightmare. But every step she took felt like the house was pulling her back in. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her chest, like someone had thrust a dagger into her heart. She gasped, clutching her chest, but the pain didn't stop. It spread, crawling like ice through her veins, numbing her limbs. She couldn't breathe. Her vision blurred, and the room spun. No, she screamed, but her voice was barely a whisper. The next thing she knew, she was on the floor, her body racked with pain. She couldn't move. She couldn't speak. And in the darkness, she heard Eleanor's voice, faint and distant. You've made your choice, Sarah. Now, it's time to begin. The ritual begins. Sarah awoke in a dimly lit room, her body cold and stiff, her chest still aching from the unbearable pain she had just experienced. The air smelled thick with dust and something else, something metallic, like blood. Her eyes fluttered open, and she found herself lying on a stone altar, her arms and legs bound with heavy ropes. Panic surged through her, and she pulled at the ropes, but they held firm. She tried to scream, but no sound came. The only sound was the soft rustle of footsteps. Eleanor stood in front of her, dressed in a dark robe, her face expressionless. This is it, Eleanor said, her voice almost detached. The final step in the ritual. The house is calling to you. It's time to fulfill your destiny. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. No. This couldn't be happening. She couldn't let it. But before she could protest, the room seemed to shift. The air grew thicker, the shadows deepened, and Sarah felt a pull, a force that seemed to come from the very walls of the house itself. Eleanor stepped forward, placing her hand on Sarah's forehead, her fingers cold as ice. Rest, Sarah. The house will take care of the rest. Sarah felt a wave of dizziness crash over her, and she struggled against the ropes, but it was no use. She was trapped. The ritual had begun. The darkness enveloped Sarah like a suffocating blanket, and every inch of her body screamed in panic, as if every nerve were being simultaneously stretched to its breaking point. The cold stone beneath her was a grim reminder of the situation she found herself in. She was bound, helpless, the ropes digging into her wrists and ankles, her breath shallow and rapid as she tried to break free. But there was no escaping now. The pain that had coursed through her body moments ago was still lingering in her veins, like the ghost of some ancient curse. It wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, something that clawed at her very soul, threatening to tear her apart. She could feel the house around her, its walls alive with some malevolent energy, and it seemed to be drawing her in, pulling her further into its dark heart. Eleanor stood across from her, her face expressionless, her eyes cold as ice. She had already begun the ritual, and there was no going back. The shadows in the room seemed to twist and curl in unnatural ways, responding to the pull of the house's power. Every breath Sarah took seemed to echo in her ears, growing louder and louder, until she thought she might suffocate under the pressure. "It's already begun, Sarah," Eleanor said softly, her voice distant, almost ethereal. "You're part of it now. Part of the Blackwood legacy. This is your fate, just as it was mine, and as it was Tom's." Sarah's mind swirled, but her thoughts remained focused on one thing: escape. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't allow herself to become a part of this ancient and twisted family, bound to a house that fed off the very souls of those it trapped. But as her body lay frozen, helpless, it became clear that the house had other plans. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped drastically, and Sarah felt an icy chill seep into her bones. She shivered violently, the cold cutting through her like a blade. The shadows in the room shifted, moving as though they had minds of their own, coalescing in the corners of the chamber. The air crackled with an energy that Sarah couldn't comprehend, like a storm gathering just out of reach. It was as if the house itself was awake, aware, and eager for what was to come. The walls seemed to hum, vibrating with an ancient power that Sarah could barely begin to understand. It was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, as if the house had been waiting for this moment, for her. Eleanor moved closer, her eyes glinting in the dim light. "The power you'll receive from the ritual is beyond anything you can imagine, Sarah. The house will make you immortal, give you the strength of generations before you. But there's a price that will change you forever." Sarah struggled harder against the ropes, but they held firm. She tried to call out, to beg for mercy, but her voice caught in her throat. Something was blocking it, something deeper than fear. She felt her pulse quicken, and for a moment, she thought she might lose control. The room seemed to tilt, and her vision blurred. The walls closed in on her, the air growing thick and suffocating. "Stop!" Sarah gasped, her voice weak, but filled with desperation. "I don't want this. I don't want any of it." Eleanor's face softened for a brief moment, but the coldness quickly returned. "You don't have a choice. The house has chosen you, Sarah. You're already a part of it. The bloodline, the ritual, it's all connected. The house is calling to you. It always has." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as the shadows in the room seemed to shift once more. The air crackled with energy, and suddenly, the ropes binding her wrists and ankles snapped, as if they had never existed. She gasped in surprise and relief, but before she could move, the room around her seemed to warp, the walls stretching and shifting. The floor beneath her feet gave way, and she fell. The sensation was disorienting, and Sarah felt herself plummeting through an endless void. The darkness seemed to stretch forever, swallowing her whole. Her body twisted and turned in the air, her limbs flailing, but there was nothing she could do to stop the fall. It was as if she had been thrown into the depths of some unseen abyss, lost to the void of time and space. But then, with a violent jolt, everything stopped. Sarah's feet slammed into the ground, and she stumbled, trying to catch her balance. The floor beneath her was no longer stone, it was cold, slick, and strange. Her surroundings were unfamiliar, and as she looked around, she realized she was no longer in the chamber with Eleanor. Instead, she found herself standing in a vast, open space, an ancient, crumbling temple. The walls around her were lined with ancient carvings, their meanings lost to time, but they felt somehow familiar. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay, and the floor was littered with shattered fragments of stone. In the center of the room, there was a large altar, covered in faded, blood-stained cloth. At the far end of the chamber stood a towering statue, its features worn away by centuries of neglect. The figure seemed to watch her, its eyes hollow and empty, but somehow still aware. The air in the room pulsed with an otherworldly energy, and Sarah felt it the moment she stepped forward. It was like a current running through the very ground beneath her, vibrating through her bones. The power of the house, the power that Eleanor had spoken of, was here. It was all around her. Sarah took another step forward, her heart pounding. She could feel the house's presence in every inch of the room, in every shadow that seemed to move on its own. She could sense the ritual taking shape, could feel the power building, waiting to be released. And then, from the darkness, a voice echoed, a low, guttural sound that reverberated through her mind. "You have come, child of the Blackwood bloodline." Sarah froze. The voice was not human, not even alive. It was something older, something beyond comprehension. The words filled her mind like a flood, drowning her in their depth. "The ritual is complete. You are one with the house now. The bloodline is yours to command." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. What was this? What was happening to her? Suddenly, she felt the pull again, a force stronger than anything she had ever felt before. It was as if the house was reaching inside her, pulling her toward it, wrapping its tendrils around her soul. She could feel the power of the house coursing through her veins, like molten lava, burning and freezing her all at once. She could feel it, deep inside her, calling to her, claiming her. Her body trembled as the force took hold. She was no longer just a part of the house, she was in the house. The ritual had fused her to it, binding her to its very core. She could feel its ancient heartbeat beneath her feet, its pulse echoing in her chest. "You will never be free," the voice said again, "but you will never die." Sarah fell to her knees, overwhelmed by the flood of sensations. The power was consuming her, twisting her thoughts, twisting her very being. The Blackwood legacy was now a part of her, and there was no turning back. She had crossed the threshold. She had become a vessel for the house's power. And yet, as the house's influence wrapped around her, she realized something: she wasn't alone. In the shadows, figures began to emerge, dark, indistinct shapes, their features blurred by time and decay. They were like specters, ancient and worn, yet still very much present. They were the ones who had come before her, the ones who had been swallowed by the house long ago. And now, they were waiting. Sarah stood up, her body shaking, her mind reeling. The house had claimed her, just as it had claimed them. She was part of something far greater than herself, something ancient, something terrifying. But was there a way out? Was there any way to break free? A faint sound interrupted her thoughts, a whisper. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, more distinct. A voice, calling her name. Sarah. She turned toward the sound, but all she could see was darkness. The darkness around Sarah pressed in on her like a living thing, suffocating and all-encompassing. She felt it in her bones, in the very air she breathed, as though it had seeped into her blood, her soul. The ancient power of the house was no longer a distant force, it was now a part of her, swirling inside her, claiming her very essence. The power was alive, and it was hungry. She stumbled forward, the shadows swirling around her like a thick fog, and yet, there was a clarity in the madness. As she moved, she could feel the presence of the Blackwood ancestors, those who had come before her, lost to time, but still lingering in the dark corners of this cursed place. The figures she had seen earlier were not just apparitions, they were real. Real in a way that transcended death, trapped forever within the house's walls, bound to it by the same ritual that now held her. They were the ones who had sacrificed themselves, their lives consumed by the power of the house, their souls forever tethered to it. And now, Sarah was no different. She had crossed the threshold. She had become part of it. The whispers in the shadows grew louder, the voices of the lost ancestors calling to her, urging her to accept her fate. They were trapped, just as she was, unable to escape the clutches of the house, unable to break free from the curse that had bound them for centuries. And yet, there was something in their voices, a sense of resignation, of hopelessness, that made Sarah's heart race with fear. Was this what awaited her? Was this her future, forever bound to this house, this legacy? The bloodline that had once promised power, immortality, had now become a curse, chaining her to an existence of eternal torment. Sarah. The voice was faint at first, but it grew stronger with each passing second, filling the air with its familiar resonance. It was the voice of her mother-in-law, Eleanor. But this time, it wasn't distant, it was right beside her, almost like a presence, like a spirit guiding her through the darkness. Sarah turned toward the voice, her body trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. The room had shifted again, the walls bending and warping, the space around her growing larger, more distant. The shadows seemed to be alive, reaching out toward her, pulling her deeper into the void. But Eleanor's voice, her mother-in-law, was the only thing that remained constant. "Sarah," Eleanor's voice called again, this time softer, more intimate. "You can still change your fate." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Change her fate? Was that even possible? She had already given herself to the house, to the ritual, to the bloodline. Could there still be a way out? Or was she too far gone? She had to know. "Eleanor," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible against the rising storm of shadows. "What do you mean? What can I do? How do I escape?" A flicker of light pierced the darkness, and suddenly, Sarah found herself standing in front of her mother-in-law, or at least, a version of her. Eleanor's face was pale, her eyes hollow with the weight of centuries of suffering. She was no longer the woman Sarah had known, but something else entirely, a spirit, a soul lost to the house, trapped in the endless loop of the ritual. "You can't escape the house," Eleanor said, her voice soft but filled with an unsettling certainty. "Not without paying the price." Sarah's mind reeled. "What price?" she demanded, her voice shaking with desperation. "I don't care about the price. I just want to be free. I want to leave this place. I don't want to be a part of this cursed bloodline anymore." Eleanor's expression softened for a brief moment, the flicker of sorrow in her eyes almost human. "I know, child. I know. But there is no escaping it. The house claims you, as it claimed me, as it claimed all of us. We are bound to it, to its will. And when you are one with it, you will become a part of the endless cycle. You will live forever, but you will never truly be alive. You will never truly be free." Sarah's heart broke at her words. She had wanted to escape this fate, but now it seemed as if it was inevitable. The ritual had bound her to the house, and there was no way out. She could feel it deep within her soul, the power of the Blackwood bloodline, the power of the house, coursing through her, suffocating her. "No," Sarah whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, I refuse to accept it. I won't become like you." But as she spoke, she realized that something had changed. The house had already taken a piece of her, something vital, something irreplaceable, and she could feel it slipping away, like sand through her fingers. She had given herself to it, and now there was no turning back. Eleanor's voice softened, her tone almost wistful. "You still have a choice, Sarah. There is a way to break the cycle. A way to set us all free." Sarah's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "A way to break the cycle? How?" "The key," Eleanor said, her eyes darkening. "You must destroy the key, the one you found in the chest. It is the last link between the house and the bloodline. It holds the power of the ritual. If you destroy it, the house will lose its power, and the cycle will end." Sarah's heart raced. Destroy the key? But it was the key that had bound her to the house in the first place. It was the key to the ritual, the final piece of the puzzle. Could she really destroy it? But how? Sarah asked. "How do I destroy it?" Eleanor's expression darkened, and she stepped forward, her ghostly form flickering like a candle in the wind. "You must do it before the ritual reaches its final stage. The house will try to stop you. It will fight against you. But you mustn't let it." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process Eleanor's words. The ritual. The key. The house itself. The final stage of the ritual was upon her. If she didn't act now, if she didn't destroy the key, she would be lost to the house forever. And yet, as the shadows pressed in around her, she could feel the house fighting against her. It was alive. It was angry. And it would not let her go so easily. Sarah glanced around, her eyes falling on the altar in the center of the room. The key was there, resting atop the blood-stained cloth, glowing faintly with an eerie light. It seemed to pulse with life, beckoning her toward it. But as she took a step forward, the room seemed to shift again. The shadows grew darker, and the air grew thicker. She could hear whispers, voices rising in a cacophony of sound, the voices of the ancestors, of the ones who had been trapped in the house before her. "Don't do it, Sarah," they whispered. "The house will consume you." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The voices were pleading with her, warning her. But she couldn't stop. She had to destroy the key. She had to end this nightmare. With every step she took, the shadows grew darker, the house seeming to fight against her every move. The walls trembled as if the house itself was alive, trying to prevent her from reaching the altar. But Sarah didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Finally, she reached the altar. The key glowed with an otherworldly light, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. It was almost as if it were waiting for her, calling to her, urging her to take it. But Sarah hesitated. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cold surface of the key. And then, without another thought, she grabbed it. A sudden rush of energy flooded through her, overwhelming her senses. The house roared, its voice shaking the very foundations of the room. The walls groaned, the shadows writhing and twisting around her like a living thing. But Sarah didn't let go. She held the key tightly, her grip unwavering. And with a final, desperate cry, she slammed the key onto the ground, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The house screamed. The ground shook violently, and Sarah felt the world around her crack and shatter. The shadows that had once surrounded her twisted and writhed in agony, and the air was filled with a deafening roar. The power of the house was crumbling, collapsing in on itself. And then, everything went silent. The room stood still, frozen in time. The shadows had disappeared, and the walls had stopped trembling. Sarah felt the power drain from her body, leaving her weak and exhausted. But the weight, the suffocating presence of the house, was gone. It was over. She had done it. Sarah stood alone in the silence, her body trembling, her heart still racing. The house that had once controlled her, that had once claimed her, was no more. And with its destruction, the Blackwood bloodline was broken. Eleanor's ghostly form appeared before her, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You did it, Sarah," she whispered. "You set us free." And for the first time, Sarah felt the weight of the house lift from her shoulders. She was free. The final part of the story, Sarah makes the ultimate choice to break the cycle and destroy the key that binds the Blackwood family to the house's curse. The house fights back, but in the end, Sarah's strength and determination break the chains that have held the family captive for generations. The power of the house is shattered, and Sarah emerges victorious, free from the curse that once threatened to consume her. This concludes the story, leaving Sarah with a sense of freedom, but also with the haunting memories of everything she endured. She has destroyed the house's power and freed herself from the legacy of the Blackwood bloodline, but the cost was high, and the weight of what she experienced will stay with her forever.